every year.
There's a total disconnect now between the ruling group and the masses.
I hate psychology.
Clear out.
They're the same worm-like characters.
Analysts.
Fuck you with your stupid argument.
They should not bother us.
Democracy. All of this just works.
Vote for the generations that are coming.
Fully dynamic game engine.
A millennial video essayist.
Always support strength,
Constant cradle.
and identity.
I haven't yearned.
They are a disease of our time.
Clear them out. You're voting for what your grandfather and father fought for.
I sit and yearn.
Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, the weekly show for those who like to consider themselves sensible centrists. Today is going to be a pre-recorded episode because of time zone shenanigans. I've decided to call this episode the Australia-Norway Foreign Exchange Extravaganza because we are visited today by two Aussies, as it were. Ludwig Path, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Came off a company party recently, so I'm trying to just get back to myself with the coffee.
Nursing
but
the
I'm
hangover.
excited. Yes, but I'm excited for the guests from down under.
Exactly. And our first guest is the one and only Chris Gard. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. While Ludwig Path is nursing a hangover, I'm creating one right now. I'm drinking a Jameson after I've just pounded down a bunch of Baileys whilst on Mr. D's Twitter space. All the usual characters are there with the Semi-Agog and Panama hat, and Red Hawk popped in before I left, so that was good fun. But yeah, other than that, I'm just sitting here enjoying this wonderful, sleepy, warm evening in the tropics of North Australia. And excited to talk to a couple of snow apes. How are you?
Yes, it's certainly been a harsh winter compared to last year for us here. And you brought a friend as well, NaillTone. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. This is the first for me, so I'm a little bit nervous.
Don't worry, we don't bite.
We'll be gentle, mate.
No, God wanted to bring you along because we're going to be talking a bit about. Well, we're going to try to learn a bit about Australia, at least from our perspective, and we're going to talk a bit about differences and similarities between our cultures, and just kind of take it from there, I think. But before that, I have a bit of a score to settle. Because you and I have been chatting a bit on Twitter, Gard, and
Yes.
I think you asked me at some point, because you sent me like a picture of a plate of blueberries and salmon or something, and you said this is the most Scandinavian meal ever. And you asked me what like Norwegians eat for, let's say, like Christmas, right? Like if you have like a Christmas breakfast or something.
Yeah.
And I sent him a photo of something that a lot of us do eat, which is usually smoked salmon, maybe with some eggs, very often on a piece of bread, right? Because
Yes.
in Scandinavia, everything goes on a piece of bread. That's just how things work. And you called me a bourgeois. I invited you into my culture, Gard, and you insult me.
Well, I mean, look at that.
With a video. Hang on. Then you follow up with a photo of you eating an entire plate of chicken. So I guess we'll have to leave this to the comments. Like, what's the winner here? Is it the plate of chicken or is it the salmon and eggs?
I completely forgot about this. I mean, bring up that picture of your meal there, but let's have a look at this bread.
Yeah, sure. Bread. This is homemade bread, by the way. This is my mother-in-law's homemade bread, so I'm going to advise you to be careful about what you say next.
Yes, so to the average Australian, or perhaps to the average underclass American, they would look at this bread and be very confused because it's not perfectly alabaster white and uniform
Ooh,
in
yeah.
shape.
Yeah.
But I must say that does actually look very tasty. I may
It
come
was
around
very
to it.
tasty.
I used to eat a lot of
Wow.
salmon and eggs on toast. But what I would do is I would always over innovate with the organization of the ingredients, and also continually add more ingredients, and it would become more and more decadent.
Yeah. That's the mistake a lot of sort of
Yes.
foreigners, I guess, does when they look at the Scandinavian food. It's supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be bland. That's the charm. That's how we likes it, right?
with each iteration of a meal like that, after about 3 or 4 times, I would start doing things like adding cottage cheese, and then I would add some bacon, and then I would add some avocado, and then I would add some cheese of some sort. And by the end of it, it's just an inedible giant pile of extremely rich, hard to digest food. And then I put it all together. But yeah, that's just me.
You're sitting there eating an entire dinner for breakfast thinking, how do the Scandinavians do this? We don't. It's slice of bread with just a tiny slice of cheese, no butter, and then we sit in the dark and cold and eat it. And that's what we do.
I'm just imagining like the ambient sounds of Norway is just the intro music to Vikings.
I wish, but no. It's just the howling of the wind.
Oh, sounds magic.
All right, so
perfect
let's
church
move
burning,
on
church burning weather.
Yes. So let's move on a bit to we've been going a bit back and forth about sort of what to talk about if you were to come on, Chris, and what I've sort of experienced from my point of view, because I've happened to have lived and or worked in towns where the universities there have exchange programs with Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people I've bumped into have spent, years in Australia going to university there. Most of them like 2-3 years in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Queensland. Maybe that's just a region.
Queensland, the state. Yep.
That's the state. Yeah. And what sort of struck me as interesting is how they talk about, it's great because it's so similar to Norway. Obviously, the weather is different, and you were talking about the drop bears and the hoop snakes and all that before we went on. But when they talk about, it's clean, they're kind of like us. There's high taxes, no wine at the supermarket, high trust, labor protections. It's like coming home. It's just warmer, right? That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's correct. So that, I guess that would be my first sort of like, what do you think about that when you hear someone like a Norwegian say that?
Well, that entirely obviously depends on where you are. If you go to
the first one, how different is it between the states then?
Very different, not just between the states, but primarily between just like any other Western country or any other Commonwealth country. The difference is stark between the regional and the cosmopolitan sort of areas, the urban areas. But for the most part, if you were to live in some, quiet provincial little town, far out from the urban sprawl of a city, quiet little town, fairly homogenous for the most part. Still, obviously, all just like the UK, all these places are governed by councils that are sat upon by middle-aged Karens, the perpetual bug women of the West that rule us.
We don't have those councils that the Brits and you guys do. That's your problem to deal with, apparently. Yeah, we don't have that. I mean, we do have local municipality gatherings, sort of democratically elected representatives for them on municipality level, but no council in the same way that you guys have
This is
where
how-
old people
this is
yell
how
at
the-
each other over extremely petty grievances.
This is how the cosmopolitan pos buries itself into small towns and stuff in Australia. Is these middle management type women who, aspirational middle class women who join councils of these small places. It's exactly what we were talking about on UO the other day on AA's channel. Was like just this middling, interfering, nosy woman who just wants to be in everyone's business, and she gravitates towards these positions in council chambers to enact some little power that she has wherever she can, and it's usually in the form of some kind of equity, feminine based.
And they post
nonsense.
about it on LinkedIn or something, right?
Yep, exactly. So in the sense of what your Nordic friends have said in terms of its similarities, there are many places in Australia which actually do have a strong Germanic background too. I mean, if you go to places, what's that town, NaillTone, in South Australia, just outside of Lobethal? It's very German. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Oh, Harndorf.
Oh, I mean, it's got a fucking German name. You go to a place like that, even though it's extremely touristy, the surrounding areas are very white, very high trust. Everyone knows everyone. I imagine it would have a similar sort of communal character as in many places in Norway, except it's warm rather than extremely cold.
Yeah, so it's more a fact of globalization than anything else.
Precisely. Yeah, just like anywhere else. I mean, this great homogenization of all cities and landmark places in the world are all starting to look exactly the same, and that's no different here. So wherever there is city that spreads is basically just a global vessel, basically a globalist sort of vessel. But
I was afraid of that. I just had a small hope that maybe it was something else.
No, you can really get a sense of actual genuine Australian character in a lot of small regional towns in Australia. And it's still very alive. And you really don't have to venture very far to go. I've heard many people in Canada saying the same thing, or they'll venture outside any of the large towns or cities, and the contrast between how fucking based the people are is just insane. Like they're just from another planet entirely. So we have that same thing here. We really just need to bomb the cities in Minecraft, of course.
In Minecraft, theoretically, bomb them with political power. Yes.
Exactly.
So, would you say? I mean, if you can put it on a scale anywhere, where would you place Australia on the based to gay scale, or I should say, how globalist would you characterize Australia in the wider context of the West, as it were?
What do you reckon, NaillTone? What do you reckon we're at?
It's increasingly
Maybe I can help a bit, because we usually get articles here in Norway whenever Australia does something, that the regime, as it were, likes, whenever they do like gun control,
Like
etc.
Voice.
Like, look at the Australians; they're being sensible, right?
Like the voice to Parliament thing, the Aboriginal voice to Parliament. Yeah.
Well, I would say that there's an undercurrent that is pretty that rejects a lot of the mainstream narratives, and that's growing. But generally speaking, the powers that be are very much in accordance with globalist aims, and there's this huge chunk in the middle who just don't care, and most of them are boomers. They're just worried about making sure that the line goes up and the house prices stay up.
Yeah, they're worried about their house prices. Yeah.
And that's but mind you, I will say is that a lot of those of my parents' generation, they're starting to now wake up to the wokey stuff, and because it's starting to bleed into their life. And whereas 12 months ago they would have just gone, that's just all silly, doesn't involve me, doesn't impact on me. And now they're starting to hit they're starting to see grandkids, and they're actually being they're being confronted with the reality of of what's going on in terms of social engineering. They're still way off the mark when it comes to actual political manoeuvring, what's going on, because they still have got this irrepressible faith in government being the saviour, and they do everything in our interest, and you should support the government, that sort of stuff. So, but then it's a very, from my perspective, it's a very stratified society in terms of everything from the youngest generations, which are going through school, they're being indoctrinated. Then they get to university, and there's more indoctrination, and then you've got the tradies who go off on a different route, and they're just worried about where they're going to get the next carton of beer, and where they're going to pay the rent or not, and how good their car does burnouts. There's the typical tradie, just live a day as it comes. When I work in a trade environment. I dig trenches.
When you say, you mean like tradesmen?
Tradies, so like tradies, like your electricians, your plumbers, your roofers, although they're a breed into themselves, aren't they, Mr. Gard? So yeah, I'm a labourer. I worked in universities for 10 years as an administrator and a manager, and yeah, well, the reason I got out was somebody was going to die, and it wasn't going to be me. Because that stuff I got out around about the end of 2016, and I was starting to see a lot of the impact of diversity, inclusivity, and equity, and all that sort of rubbish that was starting to come through the universities. And so that's really what we're seeing now, I think, in society, is a lot of people have got into HR, and they have been they're the first real batch of stormtroopers for our opposition. So yeah, sorry, a bit of a ramble. That's where I think it's pretty stratified, and it is that polarization is starting to happen.
So compared to someone like the US or America, then, I mean, Australia is sort of just entering the culture war, as it were.
Yeah, well, they sneeze, we catch a cold, but it's about 10 years, I would estimate, between.
Yeah, but I mean, I know a few things about Australia that I just kind of pick up here and there, and there's, as I've understood, there's kind of been a certain inborn conservative instinct within the Australian government in terms of being able to cap a lot of the, let's say, the worst excesses of American culture. I mean, I'm talking about things that would have been made fun of on the internet. We did a stream, like, maybe it's almost 2 years ago now, where I was talking about like the sort of garbage trash culture of the 90s and early 2000s. But the reason I thought of that, because I've heard that Australia has been a little bit more gung-ho on censorship in particular. Like when I was more interested in gaming, for example, they would talk about Australian bans on, like, they would be the first to ban a new game if it came out, say like GTA or something, or Manhunt, or one of like these more excessive titles. But I'm just wondering if this is like a general trend that's actually been positive for Australia.
This is what differentiates us from America. And if you look at a place like New Zealand, because New Zealand got so much media coverage throughout the world because of Jacinda Ardern's COVID policies, and not just that, but also her other insane policies.
WEF connections, probably.
Oh, just the whole lot. So most of Australian managerial government is like her, except we don't really get much attention for that side of things. And then the thing that differentiates us between us and America is the censorship thing, where we have a government that is completely unashamed and very happy to enact any means of censorship and suppression, because we don't have a constitution, we don't have a written constitution like America does. It's not encoded. So it's basically, it's very similar in its Westminster parliamentarianism as the UK. I think we've nearly got an exact carbon copy, except with a few amendments. And rather than being a constitutional monarchy, we're just we're a parliamentarian government that has like a veto loyalty to the king, but nothing much more than that. But within that, we have most of the problems that you would have seen recently of those sort of culture war things entering our politics from America. All of that, I used to occasionally peruse, Parliament out, like watching some of the Parliament sessions, and who brings up what issues and what motions get passed. And the one that all the times that the American-centric culture war issues enter the parliamentarian discussion, it's fucking women bringing it up every single, and it's women not just from like any party. It's usually women from the Labour Party, women from the Greens Party, and it's only recently that women from the Liberals, which is our conservative, like quote unquote conservative party, and National Party that have also started bringing those subjects up. But other than that, it's always been fucking women bringing it up. It's just polluting the fucking room.
Well, it's conservatism doing conservatism stuff. They're lagging behind, so they have to adopt the same points that Labour was talking about 10 years ago, I guess.
And am I to understand that Norwegian government is the same? Like your female governance is sullying the waters, so to speak. Because I have a running thesis that's similar to Dee's, which is literally all of our problems stem from women being in power.
Well, it would be interesting to try to trace that, but you can certainly say that a lot of the groundwork of the American importation, at least from the 70s onward, in terms of culture, would be due to female politicians. Don't you agree to that, Legbath?
Yeah, actually,
key characters.
It sounds correct, but I'm not sure if I can make it like a direct trace of it. I do, like in my gut, feel like the assessment that either that women are the direct problem or that women is a proxy for the problem. That when you have women, the problem is going to be in the same location.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if you're a politician in the 60s, you're a man, right? You don't really have let's say any time from between the 60s and 2000, and you're a man in politics, you don't have any incentive to bring in any of these topics, sort of importing them from America.
No,
there's
exactly.
nothing. You gain literally nothing by doing it.
Exactly.
I guess my follow-up question to Gard is like, which culture war issues are the hottest in Australia right now that these women are bringing up? Because I assume that not all of it is going to transfer from the American context, especially because of demographics.
I think the first major one was sort of around NaillTone. You can maybe back me up here. Would have been, I want to say, 2016, when they started waffling constantly about the pay gap, the gender pay gap. I think that was the first introduction to absolute retarded culture war issues.
Would
you say it was the pay gap?
School.
It is. They're still fucking going on about it.
Yeah, that, and then closely followed by He Touched Me.
Me too.
And then it's kind of morphed into, well, let's just completely forget about any sort of entitlements to women when it's a man who says it's a woman. So that the trans issue is probably the biggest one at the moment. So it just goes from one. It's progressively getting smaller and smaller, the minority. That's so that if you want to pick the next big issue, it will be something even smaller than how many allegedly are trans.
Just
so
sort of working their way up the progressive stack, as it were.
Exactly. So it's pretty logical.
Progressive stack singularity, where it ends up on a pinpoint. It's just like It's one person. It's political.
Disabled,
Aboriginal. It's political organization around one person.
It's probably easier just to characterize it as anything but white, male, and heterosexual. That's that's where the conversation is. But I think might be worth, Gard, maybe giving a bit of a flavour for what actually our respective left and right parties, in inverted commas,
That would be nice.
how they're actually characterised. So we got,
Yeah.
in Australia, we've got the Labor Party, which is spelt Labor. I don't know. I'm still yet to find out the reason for why they spelt it the American way. So there's a Labor Party, and then you've got the Liberal Party, which is in coalition with the Nationals, which are basically a farmers' party. And then you've got the minor parties like the Green Party. So what we've seen recent years is the, what do they call them? The purples. Yeah, so it's the women, again, in fairly affluent seats in a suburban latte sipping seats where they're not quite liberal and they're not quite Labor. They're basically, you could name them Malcolm Turnbulls, who was one of our former Prime Minister. So the Conservatives, I think they've been fairly robust in this country on social issues over the decades. However, they've made some big blues. One being the Immigration Restriction Act repeal back in the 60s, otherwise, aka the White Australia
White
policy.
Australia policy, yeah.
And then there was, and they dropped the ball, and we had the liberalisation of universities that set ridiculous expectations amongst our population. So that's on the Labor side of things. But generally speaking, I think it's worth it. So the Labor Party and although the Liberals don't admit it, both of them have got factions. So on the Labor side, you've got the right faction. So your Conservatives, mainly Catholics, is probably a good way to describe it. That's the conservative part, socially conservative part of the left party, the Labor Party, and then you've got the left faction, and that's where most of the lunacy,
the shit lives.
That has historically been contained by the right faction, who just turn up and smack heads together and just go, no, none of that nonsense.
Yeah.
So you get the occasional reformed Trotskyist in amongst the left faction. On the Liberal side of it, you've got a right and a left, and that socially conservative right faction within the Liberals has really been ascendant. However, this is a part, for me, it would be probably contentious for a lot of people, is that Johnny Howard was on the money regarding immigration, but he, in my view, he made a few blunders with politically, tactically excellent decisions in terms of going after the tradies, in terms of what they termed the socially aspirant voter. So that's those who wanted to make good of themselves and earn more money. The Liberals did a bloody good job of pulling them out of Labor camp and into the Liberal camp, and that was in the late 90s and early noughties. But since Howard's, who was a fairly divisive sort of prime minister but highly successful politician, we had a good little spot there with Tony Abbott, although his government was dysfunctional, and he's all over it. He understands the situation, although he is a bit boomerish.
I consider Tony Abbott actually to be closer to one of us than any of the rest, of the people in the party. Yeah,
he's a base Catholic. In that sort.
He's an absolute fucking autist. He's actually in charge of foreign trade in the UK government, if I'm to understand. He's a Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
My reference to Tony Abbott, I guess, is the clip online, I assume most people have seen, where he's just being asked questions by the audience and he's winking to the camera. Like he's talking to this person who says she does like phone sex work or something and she can't get enough money for her disability. So, and he's just like winking at the camera. He's just implying that she's just making stuff up on the spot. I mean, it's a great clip for those who haven't seen it.
He smell bullshit.
Tony Abbott got absolutely fucking railroaded by the media in every direction the whole time he was in. other than as well as the fact that he got completely backstabbed by his own party. But he, I think there was a famous one where he was talking to some farmer, and it was like an onion farmer, and he bit into the actual onion, and everyone made fun of him
Like
for
an
it.
apple?
Yeah, he bit it like an apple. And for that, he received national ridicule, and everyone was, "Oh, Tony Abbott's a fucking idiot. He bit an onion like an apple." And it came out later on that it's like, look, when you're talking to these farmers and you're a politician, they're handing you a piece of their produce, but many of them do actually taste their own onions like that. It's not unusual.
And no, if you want to taste it, I get it. Yeah.
And he's just like, look, you're given an item by a farmer of produce, and yes, it is an onion, but you can actually bite into it, a good onion, and sometimes it's actually not that bad. He's done it
Good raw
before.
onion. It's great. Yeah.
Yep. And for some reason, they treated it like he'd bitten into a baby or something. It was just retarded. And there was another instance where he was approached by someone asking him I can't even remember what it was about, but he went into a state of shock. Like he just stood there shaking his head, not being able to talk for about, I think it was about 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. And it was really odd, but it struck me instantly of an autistic stimming moment. Like he just got locked into a weird mental loop, and they made fun of him for that. They said he's a fucking idiot. Like, look at him. He can't even talk. He can't even answer a question. He just sits there shaking his head. But anyone watching it with something between their ears would instantly see. It's like, when you get like autistic people, sometimes they get locked in a little cognitive loop. But by all other accounts, all of his academic work, and all of his work within the government itself, he's an absolute fucking genius. And he was one of the best prime ministers we've ever had. But he was completely suppressed by a hostile party, and the media, which at the time that he was in office was completely in hysteria over all the latest culture war issues that were just starting to come out of America. So all the feminism and all that sort of stuff. So
it's worth adding that Tony Abbott was in. Now, am I right in saying that he was immigration minister for a bit?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Australia, the immigration minister portfolio is cancer. It's a poison chalice for any politician. And we've had some pretty good people in that position. ScoMo, Scott Morrison, he was immigration in the Abbott prime ministership, and he was treated with contempt. Mind you, he's a bit of an arsehole, but Abbott did a good job in that portfolio. Philip Ruddock, prior to him, basically that was a career ender for him once he did that. But he had enormous respect within the immigration department for the work he did, and by people who actually voted for those policies. They did a bloody good job. And this is where I think it's also worth noting is that I find, in my understanding of the Labor Party, the left side of politics, is that all of this stuff, including zero emissions and any sort of environmental policies or social issues, that sort of stuff, anything, and even the Aboriginal issue, it's all tokenism. They're an incredible machine, the Labor Party, whereas on the liberal side of things, they're very much a values based, and they do have a variety of opinions within that party. They're not as monolithic as the Labor Party. The problem is that the left side of the Liberal Party is in ascendancy.
Yeah.
And they're leaving.
Most of these are women too.
Yeah, and they are geared for that managerial class of operation where they're highly efficient and effective at pushing people out. So that's my two cents worth. Your thoughts, Gard?
Yeah, as I said, most of this ascendancy is for the most part a lot of women and a lot of effeminate men. The Labor Party, like you just look at the cabinets for these groups, and it's exactly what you expect it to be. A lot of the state governments as well, same deal. The more so places like Victoria, surprisingly, Western Australia is extremely is governed by a bunch of extremely dysgenic people. And Tasmania, sadly, was once Tasmania, once upon a time, was a very
I'll just point out this is their website.
Yeah, that just about sums it up. Yep.
Not many of them to the ton.
Holy shit. Yeah, it's worse than I thought. Okay, all right. So yeah, Tasmania is
the men are sort of the lightest people in that photo in terms of weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's who does all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to know. I am interested to know a little bit about your Norwegian government structure, because I know nothing about it.
Yeah, it's been a while actually since we've discussed any of that directly. We did when we first started streaming 2 years ago. We did like this overview of we literally went through every single party. But we are more continental, I should say, in our structure than I suppose either the UK or Australia, in that we don't have any, what do they call it in the UK, the first past the post or something like that, which leads to this sort of 2, maybe 3 party structure. I mean, we have a much more coalition government centered multi-party thing going, which you see in a lot of continental European nations. So we have a broad left and right coalition led by the center right party on the right side, of course, and Labour, directly translated Labour, on the left side. And then you have your same kind of, sort of containment parties for various shades of lefties who essentially exist to pull the Labour Party to the left, and the same on the right. Except, of course, you have that old ratcheting effect of the center right eternally basically enshrining policies enacted by Labour through governance. So there's a continuous leftward shift up to a certain point. Bloody Path, do you have anything more to comment here, or did I cover it?
It sounds very correct. I mean, there's a larger government consensus, I think, in Norway, less hostility than in some places that we've talked about, say, some place like the Netherlands or something like that, where let's just say the climate is quite hostile. It's really not gotten to that point. You mostly run like Labour and center-right governments throughout history after the World War II, and it's very it's quite similar in terms of policy. The country has become very technocratic and bureaucratic,
politics
and they
has
end up
almost become stagnant because of it. Honestly, it's just you're choosing shades of technocratic managerial. Essentially just custodians at this point, right? And then the parties on the side are effectively the parties fighting the battles, really.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately...
Sorry, go on, Gark.
No, so ultimately, like, there's a lot of the governmental debates and arguments that go on, for the most part, and NaillTone, you can sort of comment here too. A lot of it really doesn't affect our lives at all. It only affects our lives if we're watching the news and we just get wrapped up in the latest policy, proposal and all the rest of it. But for the most part, most of what the government does, except for extreme tax overhauls of some sort or other, or some, Medicare levy they decide to slap on like they did with the Labor government or anything like that, it doesn't actually really affect our lives at all. And I'm wondering, so would you agree, NaillTone?
I would say that is mostly accurate. Something topical at the moment is that there's just been a bit of legislation passed at the federal level. So the Attorney General, whose name escapes me, is it Dreyfus?
Say that again, sorry.
Is it Dreyfus, the Attorney General?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Dreyfus, that sounds right.
So I'm
in triple parentheses.
Yes. So there's, and it's very relevant to him. Legislation has just been, well, amendment to a piece of legislation has just been passed, and that's outlawing any mid-century German paraphernalia. So any
That's interesting.
yeah, and it came out of the blue, and it's because, well, it's really, you could say it's kind of come to a head since October of last year, and we had a couple of very notable protests out front of the Sydney Opera House involving some well-worn slogans.
Are we talking friendly windmill flags?
Yeah.
Well,
some.
The Middle Eastern variations of.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but side by side with them, there were a few that threw up some sneaky salutes and some flags. But for the most part, it was like just Palestinian nonsense.
There was a few. I had to frame this, say it without drawing the crabs, so to speak.
Frogs.
Basically, they were shouting "gas a certain group" on the on the steps, and so that got immediate attention. And the usual suspects came out and just going, "Oh, someone please think of the children." And as a result, they decided to anything. So if you had a mid-century German knife that was given to a certain group of people who were fairly close to a very prominent mid-century German that had a certain interesting bit of paraphernalia on it, symbology rather, you couldn't sell it. You could own it, but you can't sell it now. So
because I was thinking, I mean, like in Norway, I mean, if I go to my father-in-law, he's got like, basically inherited knives and various sort of pieces of let's say uniform or maybe medallions that just sort of make their way from 1945, right? They just are inherited as well, basically just curiosities, right?
Memorabilia.
Despite and I remember my neighbor was like, he collected old weaponry just as a hobby, right? As a historical interest, and you'd be essentially outlawing all of that, right?
Well, it's ridiculous. This piece of legislation is that it's quite a lucrative market to buy and sell a lot of this old paraphernalia. And uniforms and whatnot, and it's like German medals from World War II have had, if they're in Germany, they've had the ones with an actual swastika on the actual Iron Cross, for example, are illegal. So you find a lot of these old ones that are going through op shops, pawn shops. They've had the swastika removed from, so they're defacing historical items. Now, I know someone who's just donated a Luftwaffe sword to an army museum in Australia, and because it's a paperweight now, he can't sell it. He has to give it away, and so I mean that's a property issue as far as I'm concerned. Why can't he own something like that? Why can't any of us own any of that sort of stuff?
Because someone said something spicy in public a year ago, right?
Exactly, because they're worried about the boogeyman of the rise of the so-called far right. So that's, I mean, Norway's got some very recent history that is quite terrible. I would be interested to find out whether you've had any legislation against that sort of,
No, are you talking about the 2012 happenings?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, not directly, no. But it has certainly, and we've talked about that on the Longhouse before, how it sort of prevented a lot of important conversations from taking place between 2012 and now, because of the actions of someone like Breivik. It sort of just shuts down any conversation about or it did for a long time, shut down a lot of conversations about, let's say, immigration or what would later become woke stuff, right? But of course, it's starting to come back around, and there's room for those conversations now without that being an explicit reference. But for a long time, that was a political issue, right? Almost a technical issue in the politics. But I don't think it ever led to any stricter legislation. It's more that the intelligence services just increased their funding. And so there's more involvement, I think, these days than there were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's my assessment of it, at least.
Yeah, that seems to be correct. I mean, it would be interesting to do maybe a retrospective at some point after the 2012 events to see how that actually has affected things. But weirdly enough, it seems like when you have these episodes happening in Norway, it does not really seem to move the needle as much as you'd think. It's in my opinion, like it sounds weird, but I think the left doesn't seem really savvy enough to capitalize on it as much as I think they could have. I don't know if you agree with this, but I see the same thing with like the last year, or I think the year before, you had like one of these pride parade shooters. I expected that this would turn into something that they would just use this to bludgeon anybody who was kind of skeptical of gay pride parades or something, but it actually hasn't. It seems to have, like, they've continued to sort of silence a lot of this LGBTQ
I mean,
stuff.
just now, they did have a court case against the intelligence services to determine whether or not they were actually to blame for this, because the intelligence services had been talking to the perpetrator and his groups in order to basically, as they say, map the network, right? And there were some discussions about whether or not their work doing that more or less pushed him to go through with his plan faster than he originally planned, right? Trying to push at the same time, trying to push something like some terror group to sort of confirm that they were behind it, because that's probably some, KPI or brownie points still earned with like Interpol or something if they can prove that, this was Al Qaeda or something, right? But I think it landed on their that they're not to blame. But I mean, we're talking about, the police have investigated the police and found out that the police are not to blame. But I think that maybe some people in the system see this as a massive blunder potentially. So that's why it's been hard to, gain any political power from it.
It's a bit of the same thing with 2012, actually, the Breivik stuff, that a lot of this went on to, like, this is just a technocratic issue. Well, what happened? Why didn't the police have a better
the police
plan?
knew this guy was buying fertilizer for years for a farm he didn't own, so why didn't they pay him a visit, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's one of those things, yeah. So you mentioned it a bit before with Tony Abbott and immigration, but that's also something I hear all the time when it comes to Australia, is that, actually Australia is based on immigration. But my gut feeling is always, I don't believe you when I hear that. It's just the optics are good on immigration. So do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, go NaillTone. I'm just going to look something up very quickly.
Well, depending on what side of politics you talk to, it's based or based. So if you talk to the left, Australia is based on immigration. We're an immigrant country, and it's wonderful, and we should all have a group hug and enjoy the fine row of restaurants that we have in our main streets. If you talk to
food,
yeah, it's always the so where are you eating tonight view of immigration. Whereas
I can't get over the comic line of that's the we have the recipes, you fucking glutton.
Yeah. That my thoughts exactly. But the other thing on the right side of politics, the there's I don't know if you've seen it. It's actually John Howard, and he's given a speech to a fairly hostile crowd, and basically he's just said, "We will choose who comes to this country and the manner in which they come." And it was basically drop the mic and fucking walk off. It was a fantastic bit of Johnny Howard rhetoric, and it that's always stuck with me. And that when the right's in power, they understand exactly what immigration means to the average Australian. It's one of the few, I would say, it's one of the few countries in the world, apart from the Japanese, who are just, if you're talking about a country that knows exactly how to deal with immigration, that's it. They just don't. They just don't do it. Whereas
so just before you go on with that, just with Japan very quickly, I have everyone's been going on about how people have the wrong idea about the amount of foreigners and whatnot in Japan. They're like, you need to go there just recently. Like it's ever since, the last 5 years, the amount of foreigners in the country has gone up, blah, 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 blah. But it's just like, yeah, but the difference with Japan and us is in Japan, the majority of those people have to leave. That they're not staying there. Like, and if they stay there longer than a certain amount of time, they get either arrested and deported or imprisoned and deported. So, whereas in Australia, like the amount of foreigners we have compared to them is more, and they're all fucking staying here. So,
yeah. So we're in the midst of when I dig foundations for housing, and so I'm acutely aware of how many houses are going up at the moment. It's it's booming. And that's purely because we've in the last year we had close to 600,000 come into the country in a population of 500,000. And a population of 25 million, 26 million. So normally, historically, it's been going from 200,000 to 300,000 over about a 15-year period. So from about 2000, we were doing about maybe 200, then 220, and so it was very. And both sides of politics were quite measured in the numbers. Where we've had problems in this country is where we've been getting migrants from. So the rhetoric on the left is, "Thou shalt not criticise immigration, otherwise you're a racist."
Yeah, that's the good old.
Yeah. Whereas if you have lived in certain suburbs in South Australia where they've had an influx of migrants from, say, South Sudan, as we did 20 years ago, that was an absolute fucking nightmare for those people that lived there. And all of a sudden they had tribal justice being meted out on their front lawns.
Oh, really? Jesus.
Yeah. Machete
it was insane. It was insane.
Yeah, and the next generation, those little scallywags have had a couple of additional importations since. So it was in the paper a couple of weeks ago that they were 3D printing handguns.
Wow.
Nobody talked about but everybody who lives up there knows that they've been shooting at each other with illegally bought firearms for at least the last 3 or 4 years. It's just a failure of policing, so in Western Sydney, you've got very large concentrations of Lebanese and other Middle Eastern countries. In South Australia, we've also got Hazara refugees. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated, and it tends, well, not complicated, but it tends to get a little bit muddied in terms of where people come from under what programs. So we've got a very comprehensive immigration program. Visas, look, if you're coming from a European country and you're over 29 years of age, what you have to do to become a productive member of Australian society is ridiculous. It's a lot easier if you're from a third world shithole, because you just have to say, "I'm
counterintuitive."
Well, it's the bleeding heart approach. So
It's
Just
a,
why
it's,
it
a
sounds
to-
like that.
it's a schizophrenic immigration policy, because most people that will come from somewhere like Germany, like a European country, like a middle class person who comes over from, you know, another country or from America or something like that, the process of getting citizenship in this country is actually really fucking hard, really hard. It's the same as America. America is very difficult to become a citizen if you're coming from a first world country. You got to jump through the hoops and all that sort of shit. But literally, these people just come here seeking, like, you know, they go through the asylum process, or they just go through the third world funneling immigration process. I don't know who funds it. I'm sure it's a combination of Serco and Soros. But there's this totally weird duality between who gets in. Is like you've got these absolute third world pieces of shit, and then you have to drive these actually competent, actually useful, actually valuable potential citizens, all of whom, for the most part, white. You have to make them jump through fucking hoops, and it's completely schizophrenic.
And it must be said. I mean, I know some. I'll be careful how I say this. I know someone who is married to an East Timorese girl, and the East Timorese, when they were invaded by the Indons back in the 70s, liquidated about a third of the population of East Timor when they rock and rolled through Dili. And her and her family got out of Timor, quite rightly, because I believe part of the family was involved in politics in Timor. And she spent, at the age from 11 to about 16, spent the next 5 years in refugee camps in the Philippines, Hong Kong, Portugal, it being an ex-Portuguese colony. In that time, she knew a native Teton. She went on to learn Hakka and Cantonese while she was in Hong Kong. She then went on to learn Portuguese when she was in Portugal, and then she picked up English when she came to Australia. Met her partner, and they actually both went into immigration, worked for the Department of Immigration. Her is both in compliance. So basically monitoring, vetting people who are coming out to Australia, managing refugees that have come on a boat, for example, illegally. And she was absolutely livid because she went through a UN system where it took 5 years for her to get out of shithole camps, and her and her family educated themselves and what they could do. And I know she's talked about that when we had the Afghan migration out, or refugee problems coming out of Afghanistan post 2001, we had hundreds of boats rocking up with Afghans, and you had blokes on these boats who had been on the boats several times before. They were getting in Indonesia, they were getting booted out, and they were getting on a boat. And the situation was that their families had been taken hostage in Afghanistan, and they were basically told, you're going to get in Australia and you're going to be a drug mule. So by the Taliban, right? So the immigration department did a sterling job in keeping that out. And this is part of the rot. And I think it's the problem, it's the NGO factor. So we got this problem called these fucking refugee advocates in this country. So they set themselves up as basically ripping off these refugees who get their processing done by the government for free, and yet they're charging them $5,000 a pop.
Yeah.
And she was interviewing these people, trying to sort out the story, and she didn't. At this time, she was interviewing all sorts of people from all over. They could have Chinese and whatnot, so on the boats and everything. She caught out two separate interpreters coaching the person who was sitting opposite her, and because she knew the language, she was making matches out. That isn't fucking what he said or she said. So I'm just going to stop the interview here. Can we have a chat outside? Get this person out of here now. Absolute pitbull. And because she knew the value of the system in terms of that, it's an orderly process. You will conduct yourselves appropriately or you'll be fucked off. And Labor has consistently undermined that in this country.
Yep.
And that's why I don't know if you have the same problem in Norway, but it's starting to be a problem now. Are third parties and who they're fucking sponsored by. Yeah, it's the NGOs. They're cancer.
Third parties that are sidling up to major parties in coalitions with the backing of these NGOs. I mean, we have we have
about that.
We have
Norway,
Serco.
I'm not sure if it's relevant. Sorry, go ahead.
Have you ever heard of Serco? It's like a security firm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to do some work for a security company that had contracted me out to one of these immigration camps out in South Australia. And the people that were running the show were obviously Serco, and it was in a military camp that was repurposed as an immigration what do you call them? Just a holding place for them. And detention center. Sorry. I'm getting very tired.
We'll round this off soon.
I was absolutely fucking shocked at the conduct of the people that were in this camp, not just the people that were being held, but the people that were overseeing. And it was a case of, for instance, you'd have this obviously extremely suspicious fucking like that. They were all very suspicious people that were being held there. They were all getting processed and were likely to get like, residency here. And they would do things like one morning they would come in and say, "Oh, I need shoes for my children," and the place holding the store holding those items would go, "Okay, here are your shoes. There you go. Sign your name down here. We tick that off. Okay, you've had these shoes. It's been dispensed. See you later." Those same women would come back 2 days later saying, "I need shoes for my children," and they would go, "What? What are you fucking talking about? We gave you shoes 2 days ago." And they go, "No, you gave us one pair of shoes, and the one pair of shoes you gave us were faulty, and they fell apart as soon as we put them on. We need more shoes." And so basically nearly every single family that was being kept in that detention center would do things like that. And they were free to walk around, like they were literally just like houses built on a military encampment ground. It's basically like a little village, except it had a massive fence around it, quite distant fence. Like you couldn't see it when you're in there. So it didn't seem like you were in a detention center. It was literally just felt like you're in a little town. Yeah. And so I was absolutely struck by this. And this was at a time when I was at an age where I was still not very aware of what was going on politically in this country. And I was still pretty, the Beatles approach to, all we need is love when dealing with foreigners. And it was when I encountered this that I realized this is okay. So this is Serco that's running this
systemic problem.
Yeah, but not just a systemic problem. I didn't realize how insidious this Serco company was, because they're doing this in every country, and they're the ones that are actually in cahoots with whatever other NGO that are funding the governments to process these people to make sure they stay in the country. I don't know fucking why, but they are. So I
just Googled to see where Serco is located in Europe, and I think I am safe, at least.
It's mostly Anglo countries. Mostly Anglo countries. Yeah. So we have this problem here, and I'm thinking that there's some sort of weird political / NGO relationship with companies like these. They work in tandem with governments in order to process more refugees to become citizens, to process more immigrants, not just refugees, but immigrants in general, and housing them. So now they're not just doing things like security firms for detention centers; they're doing housing commissioning. They're buying up, or they're not buying up that, but they're buying up leases of huge amounts of property so that they can house immigrants in them, and obviously petitioning the government to increase their housing system for more immigrants. And I know for a fact now, having spoken to a couple of guys in the UK, I now know that they're doing the same thing over there, and they're working with their foreign foreign office and their immigration department to facilitate
So they
that.
get, they get the immigrants into the country. They get paid to bring them into the country, essentially, and then they get paid to build the housing.
Well, they don't build the houses; they fucking lock up the housing.
Oh, that's what they do.
As it exists. They lock up the existing housing,
right?
Further screwing up the housing crisis, making it worse.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if we have time to get into it now. I think you guys have to get going. But I wanted to ask about the housing crisis, which I've heard something about. But maybe, I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything to say. I mean, on top of all this, you guys have a housing crisis.
Yeah. I mean, I just did a little bit of a little cursory look at the figures for median house prices. The worst offending state is New South Wales, and at the moment, New South Wales, the median house prices are between $800,000 and $2 million.
That's also, how's that in terms of like American dollars? Sorry.
So $2 million here would be about 1.3 million US.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I'm just converting it. Yeah, it's quite expensive. Yeah,
that's very like it's on the unaffordability housing index. New South Wales is at the top.
I can see that. Yeah.
What's the average wage? It's about 70,000, isn't it, these days? 80,000.
And the housing is at 800. Yep.
Well, the problem it's worth noting that sort of $1.6 million for the average New South Wales home, but that's like dress circle stuff around the CBD. If you go out into greenfield sites, so a quarter acre block, 1,200 square meters. Traditional Australian dream. Let's say an hour and a half commute from Sydney CBD. Or in Adelaide, it would probably be about a 30-minute commute. For a quarter acre block, you would be paying about $200,000, maybe $250,000 in a new development just for the land. The build has gone through the roof, and so a house and land package for a quarter acre block is probably going to put you up around about the 600,000 mark.
And there's a lot of that just going cost of material.
Partly, land is expensive in Australia because it's a multivariate issue. But because we're so urbanised, we've got huge urban sprawls here in Australia, like Los Angeles. But we also are building on our best land, our farming land. But we've had the squeeze on materials, steel, timber.
It's not just materials. We have like a supply and demand of builders themselves. So builders are in extremely high demand, so they're able to just charge an absolute premium. So for every contractor.
Yeah, we can't get brickies here in South Australia. So brickies, who prior to COVID were getting about $1.40 a brick, right? They're going to New South Wales for $5, $6, and $7 a brick.
Is this like we did and the UK did with the like hyper focus on higher education since like the 2000s? Is it just that, you know, you're sitting there with a bunch of people with PhDs and no one to lay the bricks?
Yeah, part of that. Yep. And tradies here are. I mean, bricklaying is one of those trades you don't ever want to do. It's hard on the body.
It's really hard, yeah.
And so trying to get young
I understand people, it's tough work. I'm just saying.
We're in a generation of the terminally lazy.
Yeah, well, that's not just that, but you are right in a way, Walrus. Like that, there was a massive like university psyop, like a psyop on the public to all go to university over the last like 20, 30 years. And that's had a very real effect on things like that, where ordinarily you would take a young, you know, not very intelligent 14-year-old boy and you just put him through fucking trade school. So he could do something like a brickie, not just that he'd be a brickie laborer, but he could literally start his own business when he's older, because it's not that hard to start a trade business. And instead they've all been psyoped into staying in school and wasting their time, and then they just become disillusioned and smoke bongs and do nothing with their lives. And exactly what NaillTone was just about to say, which was a combination of the post-COVID. What was it called? Where they had to pay, where they were paid to stay at home. What was it called?
Furlough?
I've completely forgotten.
Jobs. Something. It was some government scheme to pay people to stay at home.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Where they incentivize everyone to stay home so they didn't spread the coup.
Interesting.
So since then, so you had like this cohort of 17 to 18-year-olds, which were literally paid more money to not work than to go to a minimum wage job.
The Americans did that as well. I don't understand why that makes sense. I don't think we did anything like that here. To pay people more. I mean, we do have quite lucrative sort of state, the dole, as it were, state-sponsored benefits. But I don't think we did anything like pay people more than it is worth. Sort of the incentive should always be that, you can make more money if you actually go out and work.
It was because we were so hysterical with COVID. We were very similar we're very similar to New Zealand in that regard. And so we were paying upwards of $600 to $700 a week to fucking 18-year-olds that had literally no overheads because they were living at home with their parents.
Yeah.
They didn't pay rent. They didn't pay anything. So they were like banking whereas ordinarily a lot of them were working.
Wait, so where would that money go in terms of like if we're talking like big, economical shifts? Like where does that money go to big multinational corporations because they're all spending it on like Fortnite and
phones, phones, like stuff, just like consumed. They consumed. It's the biggest order of consumption in our fucking Australian history. Other than the stimulus check that was paid out after the housing crisis of 2008. But for that to happen to like an age group between 17 and 18-year-olds where they're like, okay, I could either go to a job work because a lot of those tradie jobs, when you're not actually an apprentice, you're just a laborer for these sorts of either like builders or roofers or whatever. For the most part, you're only really doing 2 or 3 days a week here and there, sometimes 4 days a week, but it's never a full day. It's mostly a gig sort of job economy while you're building yourself up and you're learning, and then eventually you become full-time or you start your own business. But that's generally how it goes if you're not an apprentice. So you're literally getting paid by the government $600, $700 to stay at home and do nothing but pull yourself off. Or you can go to work and only make like $350, $400. Like it's an obvious fucking calculus.
Yeah, it's simple equation. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's completely corrupted our workforce. Like I own a business. Like I'm a roofer. I work on my own. The only reason I work on my own is because I cannot keep an employee, especially under the age of 25. It doesn't matter how much I pay them. They just, since that pay to stay at home thing has happened, they've realized that they would prefer to stay at home and do nothing than go to work. So they cannot fucking handle a hard day of work. They could if they were forced to, but because they have the choice of not working hard, they'll take it. So it doesn't matter what I pay them, I can't keep them.
Don't worry, it's coming, mate. Conscription, national service is on the way. It's on the way. They're already talking about it in the military circles. It's going to happen. So by hook or by crook, they're going to be told how to work hard.
Yep.
It's scary.
So I think I'm getting some messages here in the private chat that maybe you guys have to get going. Do you have time for one final question here, just real quick before we leave?
Sure.
I sent to you in the private chat as part of sort of what are we going to talk about? And one point I had was Australian humor, because that's something I've discovered in adulthood, that I enjoy a lot of Australian humor. Like the comedy stuff Australians produce. Growing up, I was, raised on a lot of British humor through my father, I think. But as I said, in adulthood, it's been actually more Australian humor. So if you have any recommendations for, comedy shows, etc., that you guys enjoy in Australia, I would love to hear about that. I think I sent you Gard that I really enjoyed Frontline, I think. If you've heard about that.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen Frontline? Oh.
No, I don't watch TV. Never watch TV.
Hollow Men,
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Utopia.
I have not seen that. Is that the same guys?
Yeah, same guys. And that was my life for a good 10 years. It was. I actually was watching it.
Utopia is fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
So is that so they're the same
right.
ones that made Frontline and Hollow Men, is it?
I think so. Yeah.
Working
Interesting.
Dog. Yeah.
Okay, because I think was it them that was behind Fisk as well?
Haven't seen that.
Not sure, but yeah, Utopia. I think Utopia, unironically, is one of the most accurate snapshots of, let's say, any federal government or New South Wales state government or Victoria state government. It is extremely fucking accurate.
Yeah.
So anyone that wants a nice little input, a little in view into what our politics are like, that's the place to go. Unitopia, it's wonderful. Utopia, sorry.
I'll get a hold of that. Yeah.
And it's not comedy, but if you want to watch some gritty Australian television from the 90s, Blue Murder.
Roger Rogerson. Yeah.
Yeah. He's just died the other day.
Yep.
He was a corrupt cop in New South Wales. That is so good. It's hilarious. Some of the shit they used to get up to. It's
true story too. True story.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. There's been plenty of stuff.
Kath and Kim.
Kath and Kim. Yeah.
Love Kath and Kim. Yeah.
The Castle.
The Castle.
Right.
Yep.
Heartwarming story of a struggling, battling Aussie family going to the High Court. That's a good one.
All right.
Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
That's just trash.
What is that?
It's very, very gay, but it's a
hell is this? This is some like
stuff. There's a couple of funny things in that. Wolf Creek, if you want to be scared by my people like my avatar.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Wolf Creek, that's horrendous. That's a horror flick if you haven't seen that.
True story as well.
Kinda.
Oh, they drummed it up, but Ivan Milat was a
yeah. It's a combination of Milat and that Murdoch who killed Falconio up north.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's about all I can think of. I can't think of any other.
Well, I think I got more than I bargained for here, so that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for. Sorry.
That's what I was just going to say. Man from Snowy River for a bit of Aussie culture.
Right.
It's based on. Man from Snowy River is based on Banjo Patterson, who was an Australian poet. Yeah, 1800s.
I'm actually looking now. The castle is made by the same people who made Utopia. It's the same production company.
Working Dog Company. Has a Working Dog or something? Or?
Yeah. I just Googled the castle and it showed me like the producer, and it's the same one.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost the host here. It's the Norwegian connections. There he is.
I think you guys had to get going, so I'm not going to keep you here any longer. Bloody Path, before you go, do you have anything you want to shill to our audience?
Yeah, praxarcade.com as usual. Sign up, not for the newsletter, but just for the subscription on the email. And thank you for coming to both of our guests. I learned a lot. I think we should probably do it again. I still have some more things that I'm wondering about Australia. So again, thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah, I really wanted to stay and talk some more, but the child is screaming and I have dinner waiting for me that wife's just made. So
no worries.
I was going to
thank you, Gard. Anything you want to share with the audience? Anything they should look out for, where they can follow you, etc., etc. We didn't get to talk about your music. I wanted to talk about your music, but another time.
I can. You can find my stuff at YouTube, Chris Gard Bard, or Chris Gard got Bard Music. I'm sure you'll put the link in the description there. The last video I made was a British Pathé style short documentary on the Emu War, the Great Emu War, and you will learn a lot about the Emu War, except for the fact that most of it's fictional, but it's actually hilarious. One of the best things I think I've made. And also you'll find many folk renditions of various songs and poems from Kipling, and
you can listen to Blind Guardian as well.
Yes, I've done a Blind Guardian cover. I've also done a Jorn Lande Master Plan cover as well.
Yes, you have.
I'm very, very partial to that style of music. I have a lot of my favorite bands growing up have been bands from your country, funnily enough, and a lot of bands from Sweden, obviously Jorn being one of them. But there's only so much time in the day to make music, and I can't spend my time making covers. So.
So check out Gard for his stuff, and you also regularly appear on shows like UO and on Twitter on the.
I don't know why.
I don't know why. Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up on UO. I still to this day don't understand. I sometimes I talk to academic
it's the energy.
Agents.
That's it.
Maybe because
the show.
The duality of AA being that he says he's the friend of the working man, but he's he's not. He's an absolute absolute academic scholar, pretentious twat. No, I love him, but I sometimes I'm on that show and I'm thinking to myself, I'm sitting in this room with two of the smartest people I know, AA and D, and I'm thinking, what the fuck am I doing? But I don't know. It works. It works.
Yeah, I think it's a nice balancer, I think.
Yeah.
NaillTone, thank you as well for joining. I really liked your insight into Australian culture. And of course, you're welcome to come back on whenever we're going to bring Gard back next time. Is there anything in terms of like social media you would like to inform people about, or you want me to put in the description down below for those who are more interested in your takes, as it were?
No, it's just I'm an itinerant that was picked up off the street by Dr. Gard. He touched me up in the cab and he said we're going to a party. So I said, okay, as long as there's booze. So I've dipped my toe in, and I try to steer clear of the social media because it's just insane. I love listening to yourselves.
Yeah.
I've got better things to do, like dig holes at the moment.
Great.
So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm pretty chuffed and honoured to have been part of this conversation. Humbled.
All right, great. Well, with that, I'm going to play our customary outro, and we'll see you guys next week, I suppose. I'm assuming I'm going to release this in lieu of a regular Longhouse. So whenever this is airing, see you next week.